Hello everyone, I had a request to talk about the snails found in my jars, so that's what I'm going to be doing in this week's video. I'm going to be focusing on the snails found in this ecosphere experiment, and how you can tell whether the ecospheres are doing well or are failing through the snails as a measure of the Biotic Index. So yeah, stay tuned and we're going to get into the nitty gritty, like the species of snails found here, and what the Biotic Index is. Every snail in all these jars are pouch snails, and pouch snails usually indicate that the water quality in your jars are okay, or that there's some pollutants in the jar, but it's not too much. Because these snails are tolerant to pollution, but if the water supply is very polluted, then they usually die out. And since I have about 200 to 300 of these snails in this jar right here, you can tell that there is some pollution in here since these are the dominant species, but it's not too much. And over here you can see all these tiny snails on the side moving around above the water surface, and we see the big snail moving over here. And you can see the cone he has is slightly crooked. And whenever they have a crooked cone, you can tell that the water quality isn't the greatest. Now, in order to tell what the water quality in the jar is, you can use the Biotic Index, and it's literally an equation, so you can just Google it. And it's pretty much the number of species found in a jar over the number of the one species you're looking at. So for example, you could use pouch snails. So I have 300. You do a 300 over probably 1,000 in this jar, you can get the Biotic Index and the number. And sure, it's more complicated than this because it's a whole equation. You have the number of individuals, the other things you have to plug in. But usually you get a number around like 5, 6, 7. Preferably you want lower because that means your ecosystem's healthier. But for my jars, it was around a 5 or a 6. So the water quality is okay in this jar. It's not the greatest. It's not the worst. I expected this because I got the water at, I guess you could say, a former limestone quarry. So the water quality isn't the best, and I knew that coming into this experiment. But I find it interesting that this is the one jar that pouch snails have truly thrived, and I think it has something to do with the substrate I picked. This aquarium sand made the water a bit more basic than I expected, and I mean a bit more acidic than expected, and I think that had a big impact on the snail population, because apparently they like a bit of acidity, and I never knew that. And as you can see, these snails are chowing down here on the algae, and the algae is almost gone now from the last week's video I did. So yeah, we'll see if this population is sustainable. The amount of snails in this jar has skyrocketed, and all the other species have gone down due to a decrease in the producer in algae. And I noticed an interesting behavior with these snails. They like to bully the younger snails around and get as much food as possible. But they're very kind towards their egg sacs. They usually go by it. If the egg sac is out of water, they bring water to it. So they I guess you could say, walk over the egg sac to hydrate them. And yeah, usually they wait until the egg sac hatches, and then they kind of boss them around. For example, a couple younger snails tried to eat the big algae on the bottom, and this snail over here pushed them to the side, so they're stuck to the glass eating the algae that grows there. So yeah, that's how you determine the Biotic Index, through the jars, and that's the behavior of these pouch snails. They're very tolerant to pollution. They bully the younger snails around, and the younger snails are kind of fighting for the scraps. So I'm hoping that the snail population goes down to the younger snails not getting enough food, but I don't want them to go completely extinct. We'll see if this population's sustainable. I don't think so, but yeah, that's what's been going on in this sand ecosystem jar. Also, I thought I should clarify, when I say the water quality is okay, the water quality actually in the sand ecosystem jar is poor, but since there's some copepods and arthropods, I said it was okay. When you follow the Biotic Index, 4 to 5 is about, I would say, good. The 5 range is fair water quality, so it has some pollutants, and the sand ecosystem jar is around a 6 to 7 area, and that means that it's fairly poor, not the worst water quality, but most ecospheres when you create it have poor water quality, It's very rare that some get better, like the lake ecosystem jar or the pond rock jar. Their water quality has actually improved over time, which is a good indicator that these ecospheres are healthy and they will survive for a long time. So yeah, just so you know, when I give these numbers, about 3 to 4 is really good, 4 to 5 is just good. 5 is fair, so it's not too polluted, not that great either, it's like meh, I guess you could say. 6 to 7 is poor, and anything above that is just very poor and very polluted. So yeah, that's how you can use the biotic index, just the range of it. And now let's move on to the next jar, which will be the pond rock jar. Over here in the pond rock ecosystem jar, we have one pouch snail. He's right now eating the algae on the bottom. And there's a lot of algae and a bunch of dead copepods on the bottom of this jar. He's chilling here right now. He sometimes moves a bit to eat the algae, but right now he's resting. So yeah, in this jar, the snail population is pretty sustainable, and I think that's due to it having a neutral pH. The animals are doing pretty well in here. The copepods and ostracods are thriving. And yeah, this is a more healthy ecosystem. When you use the biotic index equation, since we only have 4 pouch snails here, it gets about a score of 3 or 4, meaning this is doing pretty well. It's still polluted, but it's a lot better than the sand ecosystem jar. And you could see this, it's greener, the water is a lot clearer, and a lot of organisms are alive. You can see the water mites swimming around. So yeah, the snail population in this jar is a good indicator that this ecosystem is thriving, and you can see this due to the brush of algae here growing, and algae growing on the bottom over here. And the snail population never got bigger than 4. They didn't lay more egg sacs, meaning they didn't feel the need to overproduce due to a bad environment. So this ecosystem is doing pretty well. And you can see the pearling of the algae, meaning that this ecosystem will hopefully thrive and continue to thrive. And this goes to the same with the lake ecosystem jar. It also has about 3 or 4 snails, and the population hasn't grown or decreased since. So it means that the ecosystem is pretty healthy, and they both have a biotic index of around 3 or 4, which is really good. That's what you want. You don't want it too high because that means you have a very polluted ecosystem. But yeah, that is how you can determine the ecosystem's health using the biotic index, and why snails are a very good indicator of whether your ecosystems or your ecospheres you created are doing well. And then you can draw conclusions. For example, how long will my ecosystem last? Will this ecosystem collapse? All these things can be answered using the equation, so I recommend you guys Google the biotic index. You learn the species in your jars, and you plug and chug, and you can figure out how your ecosystem's doing that day, and then you can compare the results over time. That's what I've been doing. And my ecosystems have been stabilizing. So for this ecosystem over here, it was relatively high, but now the biotic index is, of course, stabilizing, and that means the number has actually decreased, meaning that it's getting healthier. And that's what you want, a lower biotic index number, and proof that your ecospheres are doing well and are getting better. So I think this is going to be the conclusion of this video. So we learned about pouch snails and how they can be a good indicator of ecosystem health. We learned that having too many means your ecosystem's probably not the best, but having just a few means that your ecosystem is thriving. We also learned about the biotic index, which is a very useful tool that I recommend to everyone who knows about snails or has ecospheres, just to use it. Because whatever species you have in the jar that's dominant, their tolerance ratings and all that stuff, you can plug and chug into that equation, and you can figure out the health of your ecosystem. So thank you guys for watching this video, and please like and subscribe. Bye guys.